Hi, it's Lily here. Have you ever had a problem with your dog barking at a noise, counter surfing, digging, or really any behavior that you just didn't like? Well, instead of teaching you a specific solution to a specific problem, I wanted to teach you a 3-letter acronym for an approach that you can use to solve any common behavior problem. I'll also use my own dog Patch's barking at the doorbell as an example. Here at Dogfullife, we like to eat problem behaviors for breakfast. When your dog does something you don't like, instead of yelling at your dog or getting frustrated, I want you to think about 3 things. EAT. Environment. How can I change the environment so that my dog can't practice that problem behavior? How can I change the environment to set my dog up for success? Alternatives. What alternative behavior can I teach my dog to do instead? What alternative outlets can I provide my dog to satisfy their needs and wants? Test. Test it out. Is what I'm doing working? Simple, right? EAT. Environment, alternatives, test. Now let's use the example of a dog barking at a doorbell to see this method in action. This is my dog Patches. He's a very sound-sensitive dog, so let's take this EAT approach to solve this behavior problem. Environment. What can I change in the environment to prevent Patches from barking at the doorbell? We have a Nest doorbell, so there's actually a setting where you can turn off the indoor chime and just get a notification on your phone. Another way is to hang a physical sign on the doorway so that even solicitors won't ring the doorbell or knock on the door. Here's a list that I came up with of all the things that I could change in the environment to prevent Patches from barking at the doorbell. When thinking about the environment, you can get really creative. Don't hesitate to think outside of the box. Sometimes all it takes is an environmental change to solve the problem behavior. You don't even have to go through alternatives. But in this case, I want to have a contingency in case somebody decides to ignore the signs and ring the doorbell anyways. Alternatives. What alternative behavior can my dog do instead of barking at the doorbell? Personally, my husband and I don't mind when Patches barks to alert us, but what we do want is to easily call Patches away from the door when needed. Instead of using recall or teaching speak and quiet cues, I want to show you an even easier approach using Chirag Patel's counting game. I really like to use this counting game because it's really easy for both the human and the dog to pick up. It's useful because it holds the human accountable. Just as much as the game is telling the dog to come and get food, it's also telling you to put down the food at a consistent rate. Since this is going to be a difficult behavior for Patches, I'm going to use high-value food. If you're not sure what high-value food is, definitely check out my other YouTube video about using food in dog training. This game is very simple. All I do is count from 1 and put a treat down every time I say a number. First, I start in a quiet environment with the dogs in the same room so that they pay attention. Once they come to me, I stop counting and walk to a different location and start at 1 again. I do this a few times and you can see how quickly they're starting to follow me. Now I do this with the dogs in another room. You can see how fast they sprint over once they hear me say 1. Next, I've recorded the sound of our doorbell on my phone so that I could reduce the volume and play it repeatedly on my own. Since this sound will be harder for Patches, I've reduced the distance he has to come to me by staying in the same room. I slowly increase the volume on my phone until I ask my husband to ring our actual doorbell for me. You can see the dramatic improvement of my dog Patches. At most he barks once, but most of the time he doesn't bark at all. Instead, he immediately comes to me. You can see how I've broken down all these steps in a way where I'm changing the environment to make it easier for my dog to succeed. This goes back to the E in environment. To continue practicing the behavior, I would slowly increase the distance that Patches has to come so that when the doorbell rings and I say 1, he will go all the way to the kitchen or one of the bedrooms to find me. Now, playing the counting game is just one example alternative behavior that I can use, but there are so many more. You can really be creative with this. Now, the other part of the alternative is also finding alternative outlets for your dog to satisfy their needs and wants. A couple of these outlets could be taking your dog on a sniffari, which is basically a walk where you let your dog sniff to their heart's content, or even creating a quiet place for your dog to sleep. Sleep is often overlooked because not having enough uninterrupted, restful sleep can often result in a lot of problem behaviors. Test. Now that I've created a plan for changing the environment and providing alternatives, I can test it out. I can keep track of whether the behavior is actually changing and whether the plan is actually working. Keeping a journal and recording training sessions helps me to track progress. If things aren't working well, I can figure out ways to change the environment or change the alternatives. I can figure out ways to make it easier for my dog to succeed. Keep in mind that modifying behavior is not a linear process. You may see several days of consistent improvement, and then one day you may just have a bad training session where it seems like your dog has regressed. But remember, every dog is different and consistency is key. So go at your dog's pace and try to create an environment that makes it easy for your dog to succeed. I hope you liked this simplified approach. If you'd like to get more practice in eating, check out my blog where I demonstrate using EAT in 2 other common behavior problems: countersurfing and digging. Let me know in the comments below if you were able to use this approach for a problem behavior you're facing. If you like this content, hit the thumbs up and subscribe button to get notifications of my next video. One, two, three. You can let him go, honey. I mean, actually, you didn't let him go earlier.